I was at a friend's house, and we went to a deep creek to catch frogs and turtles. From the top of the bank we spotted a swollen Ed deer covered in maggots. My friend's little brother pushed me off of the bank and I landed on the deer. It burst and kind of deflated under me, and I just laid there crying and throwing up until my friend's parents came and got me. They hosed me down in the driveway and tossed me in their pool that they had just chlorinated. Super great. Friendly stranger stopped me at Disneyland and followed my family around for a while. Asked where we were staying, and I don't know any better as a kid, so I told them. Dude showed up with a friend at the hotel pool waiting for me. I thought to call out to the guy, but my instincts made me hold back. Still don't know if that was a child trafficker to this day. Going over to a friend's house when I was maybe 10, and I caught him and his dad having a loud argument at the garage. I hid behind a nearby trash can and saw the dad pull out a gun and actually shoot his son in the leg. I freaked out and ran home to tell my parents, but nobody believed me until the police and ambulance showed up. It's hard to explain, but I saw the bullet penetrate his leg in what felt like slow motion. It still comes to mind every now and then. It was eventually fine. Never saw the dad again. I don't remember if any arrests were made. My mother suddenly screaming in the middle of the night, then dragging my sister and me from our beds into the bathroom and locking the door behind her, slamming her Bible against the door and turning off the light, then squeezing the two of us to her chest while telling us we all had to pray because a demon was outside, roaming around our apartment, looking to drag us into hell. Hysteria, tears, frantic prayers, bone deep terror. I was 10 or 11, I think. Still get shaky remembering it. Wish I could erase it from my head. Back when I was in high school, my assistant principal had to walk me to my car to grab something from it that I forgot. He seemed totally fine. We were chatting, and he told me to have a good afternoon. He shot and killed his wife and killed himself that same night. It bothers me that I didn't pick up on something being wrong. I couldn't have done or said anything, but it still occupies more headspace than I care to admit many years later. I remember me and my brother sitting on the couch crying as we watched our parents yelling at the top of their lungs and chasing each other around the apartment, threatening to kill one another. Got an iPhone for when I turned 14 on Christmas. My dad supposedly used it before I got it. Looked onto the recently deleted photos to find over 10 pictures of my dad's genitals with his face also being in themes. I forgot iPhone for didn't have that feature. Apologies, it was on the actual phone. Look, I was 13 and now I'm 18, and honestly still a haunting experience. Was home alone once as a young kid. It was summer, so I was outside in my hammock reading Percy Jackson. We didn't have any close neighbors because we lived in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, I'm sitting there closed up in my hammock when I hear a car, thinking it was my parents getting home. I popped my head out of the hammock and went to greet them. Turned out to be a white van with two middle-aged guys in it. I, being the dumb kid I was, said hello. The guys were kinda shocked, and I then asked them if they wanted to talk to my parents, and I motioned to the cars behind our house. Now from the road you can't see, but we have two other cars parked behind our house that were our families, and they must have thought no one was home, cause there were no cars in the front. Anyway, I don't remember exactly what they said, but they made an excuse and jumped back in their car and zoomed away. Didn't realize how terrified I was till after they left. Never felt the same home alone ever again. I was 7. My family took me to the circus. A man sitting behind me stuck his finger down my pant and forced his finger down my crack. I don't know what to do. I was never prepared for this. I didn't even know what this meant. So I just froze and let him. I think he was trying to find my hole and stick his finger in it because he kept pushing deeper and deeper down my pants. This was about 30 minutes. People would pass by and he pulls his hand out, but when the close was clear, he would slowly try to do it again. It was 30 minutes of hell. Finally, Mom got up and asked to come with her to the concession stand to help her carry drinks. I was so relieved. When we came back, I begged my mom to switch seats. That's all I remember. I barely recall the visual parts of that night, but I still vividly remember how it felt and the sound of his voice. My mom was dating this dude, and we were living with him. One morning, I hear super loud bangs on the door, and I run out with my blanket, and I hear my mom screaming, "Don't shoot my dogs." They are friendly as I walked from the hallway to where the front door is, so I'm standing there with my blanket around me, and she opens the door and there's a SWAT team pointing their guns at me, yelling for me to drop my blanket on the ground. Then they proceeded to tear the house apart, including my rooms, scared the shit out of me. I don't remember the exact details, but my mom said he was an ex-biker gang or something, and they were hitting a bunch of members for those asking the dogs, and everyone else came out fine. Thanks for the concern. Making out with a 28-year-old man when I was 12. At the time I was flattered that someone older would be interested in me in that way, but looking back on it now I'm disgusted and glad it didn't go any further than that. Saw my gym teacher sexually assaulting my middle school crush in the gym office. I was scared and didn't say anything. The gym teacher was caught eventually with another accident, but I still think about her from time to time, and it fills me with shame that I was such a coward. I walked into my sister's room when I was 11. Her and our cousin were passed out on the floor in piles of vomit. Pill bottles were laying near them. There was blood all over the walls and razor blades. They didn't die, but part of me did. Poking a dead body lying in the gutter with a stick. I was too young to understand what I was doing. I don't remember feeling very scared either. I never told my parents, but my older brothers have confirmed to me that it actually did happen, like an inner city Stand By Me. The strange man in my house in the middle of the night. I woke up to pee, something I rarely ever do, and went into the hallway where I saw the silhouette of a man I did not recognize standing at the top of the steps staring back at me. I'd like to say I screamed, but I just stood there. Thankfully, my father has also woken up, came out, and yelled at me to go back in my room and lock the door. The fact that someone we didn't know could just walk into our house in the middle of the night terrified me. It would be years before I realized if he was just burgling us, he would have stayed downstairs. I hate to think about why he broke in that night. Watching my father die and not being old enough to help or understand what was happening. Then, the next day, being interviewed by the coroner to find out exactly where the hands were on the clock when Daddy fell down. Whoa, I didn't expect this to blow up so much. I would like to say I am sorry that so many people have similar experiences. For those asking for more details, I was 3, and it is actually my earliest memory and only memory of my dad. He was severely diabetic and didn't take his medication or watch his diet. I was on the couch watching Sesame Street and eating macaroni and cheese with hot dog slices in it. He walked in with his plate and fell down. It was around 11 My mom got home at 2:30. In the middle of the night, I woke up to seeing shadows from the window of people trying to break in. I was scared and tried to go to my parents' room. My mom was making weird noises, and I thought maybe she was having asthma attack. My parents wouldn't let me in their room, they were doing the deed. I couldn't sleep hearing all the weird noises. The people never made it to the house, but they robbed gym clothes from my dad's car, parked outside. I lived in an apartment in a real bad neighborhood growing up, but one of the worst is when I was about 11 years old and a drunk neighbor tried to flirt with me and asked me to take my clothes off when I was playing on my scooter, and then chased my mom up the stairs with a massive knife when she came out and yelled at him to leave me alone. Having to crawl out my bedroom window and run to a neighbor a wee night to call an ambulance for my mother, who had tried to kill herself because she couldn't handle staying with her abusive ex anymore. I was 10 being better, my bitch of a teacher treating my like shit for missing a bit of school the next day to go see her in the hospital, and yes, the teacher knew the reason. Watched a guy bleed out in front of me while hanging from a nail that caught him while he was falling. I don't know what haunts me more, the sound of his screams turning to crying, and then silence, or the sight of the blood pooling up at my feet. I was 8 and I can still see it, and he writ like it was yesterday since it's being asked. I'll add some details. Basically, I grew up going to a farm with my father where he worked, and one of the farmer's older sons was up on top of their new chicken coop tending to the mesh wiring and fell through the mesh, catching on a nail on the way down. He hung there for a while. I just stood there in shock. Didn't really have a clue what was happening really. He passed before they were able to get him down. Waking up to the cops shining a light in my face in my upstairs room, then proceeded to leave. No explanation. My 7th grade teacher was raped and stabbed in her classroom early morning while getting ready for the school day to begin. The rapist ended up being my best friend's next-door neighbor. He had borrowed his PlayStation controller before the incident, so he never got it back. When I was about 5, my older cousin's best friend killed someone. My cousin helped him hide for a couple days. Cops got tipped off, warrant was issued, and with my cousin being a multiple-time felon himself, decided to run as well. At one point, he came to my parents' house to try talking with my dad. My dad didn't want to, he writ, and threatened to call the cops. Cousin took off, got into a police chase, drove on the wrong side of one of our main roads, hit a car, then flipped his car over a guardrail into the river. I was completely oblivious to everything. I just remember my dad screaming at my cousin. Found out all this stuff later, and it was a huge what the fuck moment. My cousin did like 15 years in prison spling. I was molested by a group of older kids when I was 4. They made me think it was just some fun game, and they got so far into my head that I was convinced that the entire thing was my fault for years, thinking it was entirely on me because I let it happen. That has to be the most disturbing memory that happened to me. It still makes me as uncomfortable now as it did when it happened. Taking a shortcut through the park at dusk, no one around but this large dude ahead. The man turned his head and saw me and then reduced his pace. I felt anxious but didn't really know how to react, so I kept my pace, and so we ended up walking in parallel. As I passed him by from the corner of my eye, I saw him slowly put on these black gloves, which even then I thought was weird because it wasn't a cold day. The man was now behind me but keeping my pace, catching up with me, and I still didn't know what to do. At the point I was about to panic, two women pushing their kids in strollers came into view, and the man dropped back, and I sped out the park. I was too embarrassed to bring up something that made me look weak to my family. A few weeks later, a child was abducted in our AskReddit. One thing to instill in your kid is situational awareness and not to be too proud to return when in fear. It's been over 40 years since that incident, but I can still recall being in that moment. I felt I was in danger, but was too proud umbrella sisters to do anything, so I was trapped mentally well before any physical interaction. Probably my dad slamming me against a wall after a brutal beating and then making me lie to diffs about it after the school saw my injuries when I was around 8. My dad telling me to take my little sister outside so he could shoot and kill my stepmom's dog. Worst is definitely when the babysitter forced my brother and I to rape each other. The oldest of the two of us was 8 while she filmed. Second worst is the crunch sound that happened when I gave a friend in 4th grade permanent brain damage by going sideways on a wooden swing set. He wound up graduating high school almost a decade after the rest of us did. I went outside into my backyard and found a young girl kneeling over something. I introduced myself and asked what she was doing. She had cut up a baby bird and ripped off its wings. She told me she wanted to see what was inside. I have a frickin' novel's worth fears. My mother is a pedophile escadent. I was involved with the Richmond, London child abuse scandal, which resulted in keepy floating around online of me as a child thread. My best friend died when I was 15 as a result of his girlfriend falsely claiming he raped her on 4th. When I was 14, I met my dad for the first time, only to find out he had been told I was dead and lived in mourning until the day he got a call that I was in custody of social services and my mother's family had named him as my father. I once got into a huge argument with my parents and decided to run away from home. Before I even reached the end of the street, some weird van started following me. I initially thought it had stopped, because it was going to be turning into one of the driveways in the street. When it didn't turn in, I kept walking. It started following me again. I was eventually so creeped out by the van's behavior that I turned around and sprinted back to the house. It begins at McDonald's. It's me, age 3, and my big sister grabbing lunch together. My shoes are purple and have Disney characters on them. I'm pretty sure they have Jasmine from Aladdin on them and Dial of that there purple. We finish our food and come home, and there is something wrong with Mom. Her lips are bluish purple, the same color as my sandals. Showed and Dad wasn't home. Someone called paramedics, and I remember them putting her on a bright reddish orange stretcher. They made me wait in a back bedroom, but I saw them doing medical stuff. Oh, and that's my first childhood memory. The look in my mom's eyes when she mixed bleach and vinegar in a bucket and locked me in an unventilated room with it. She knew exactly what she was doing. Folks joke around saying jingers have no souls, and that's generally bluffed, but that one, I've never known her to possess one of her own. She's only ever looked alive when she was consuming someone else's. How hard it was to get any kind of love from my childhood. The things I used to sew for just eye contact as I spoke to my mother is pathetic. We were always a burden in my mother's life, and we suffered for that in a lot of different ways. Police coming to arrest my dad, everyone crying, my mom being taken away in an ambulance. When I was 6, my neighbor's daughter would babysit me. She was around 19 or 20. She wasn't particularly nice to me. Sometimes I had to go over there very, very early and would sleep. I was a bedwetter, and she refused to get up to help clean me off, and would get furious if I tried myself, so I would just lay on the floor in my own pee until she woke up. She would also tell me we were going to play hide and seek, and then I'd hide and wait and wait and wait. And then, thinking I'd really bested her, I'd come out from my hiding spot and she'd be painting her nails or some such. Her mother's boyfriend also held me over a toilet by one leg with a lit bic in front of my face. Told me he'd kill me and my mom and dad if I ever said anything. My babysitter's boyfriend would also be around sometimes. One day, I was coloring on the bed with the two of them when she got up and left to use the bathroom. Her driver's license was lying on the bed, and he picked it up and chewed it. When she came back, he told her I did it, and I got in trouble. It really unsettled me because it was so bizarre, and I knew it even then. He did other weird things that I can no longer remember. I knew grown-ups were not supposed to act like him, and I tried my best to stay away from him after that. Not 2 weeks after that, he smothered my babysitter, killing her and her unborn child. I was not there, but I could have been, and I wonder what would have happened to me if I had been. My father raped my mother while I was sleeping on that bed for 3 years. I had to make fire in the fireplace and carry the wood myself only in the winter, and I was 10 back any father would borrow my tablet and watch porn on it, and he didn't even close the sites when giving it back. A group of my classmates bullying the kid with a handicap had him in a 4-square game and were just dunking on him. One of the few times I've ever stood up to bullies, although now that I look back, it was not in a strong enough way. I saw someone jump off this bridge somewhere in upstate New York when I was 4 or 5 years old. We were on a camping trip. I don't remember where. I just know it was anywhere between the cities Albany and Syracuse. The bridge is quite a ways above the ground, not sure how far, but far enough that it would be a damn miracle to survive. I made a big deal about it to my parents, and they thought it was just my imagination, which was a common thing for me to do, tell wild stories. The next day, my father noticed it was in the newspaper he was reading the next day. He was talking with my mom about it, but they never talked to me about it because they didn't want to freak me out, despite being in earshot of them without them knowing. I don't recall how I handled it other than being a bit shocked and completely dumbfounded that people could kill themselves. I think it helped me understand our mortality at a young age in a rather morbid way. I was able to ask my parents about it or bring it up for some reason, and I was an outspoken child. I don't believe it traumatized me in a negative way, but definitely makes me feel some sort of way every time I decide to think about it. Who was that guy? What made him want to jump? What was his rock bottom? What drove him to suicide? I'll never know, and that's the only thing that I ever think about, especially when I got older and understood emotions a lot better than a kid who was close to starting kindergarten.